up. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to quickly introduce our speakers. I also want you to know that if you have questions at any time during this, there is a chat feature in your Zoom panel. Please chat those to the box, and I will ask the questions to the panelists. They have agreed to answer them as they can throughout the session. I'm going to start off with our most esteemed visitor and panelist of the session. This is Heather Griffin. She's SVP of Inside Sales at Momentum Solar. Heather, thank you for joining. Tell us a little bit about what you do over there at Momentum and why you're here today.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hi, my name is Heather Griffin. I am SVP of Inside Sales at Momentum Solar. We have approximately 300 to 400 outbound telemarketers, and my job is to oversee the entire operation of Inside Sales.
Awesome. We're going to move quickly over to Mike Velarde. He is also a Leads Council member, one of our newest one, and he is SVP and Dialing Manager of Resource Marketing Group. Mike, thank you for joining. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do for Resource Marketing Group and what do they do.
Hi guys, my name is Mike Velarde. I'm Senior Vice President over at Resource Marketing. We're an outbound call center, 100-seat call center remote. I've been running the dialer for about 4 years now, working through several changes in the market. We run several verticals, really exciting times. We're always changing. So there's a lot going on over here every single day.
Awesome. I'm going to move now to one of my best buds. He is one of the also board members of Leads Council. He is co-founder and CEO of Convoso. Nima Hakimi, thank you for joining us on this. And tell us a little bit about you and what does Convoso do?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Rob. So yeah, I am the CEO and co-founder of Convoso, and it is a call center platform. And we're really passionate about helping sales and marketing-based call centers be successful in converting their leads, and any which way we can do that. That's really what I'm passionate about. So I'm excited to share with you guys a lot of tips today.
Awesome. So Leads Council is a nonprofit association, a trade association in the lead generation and performance marketing space. We set standards for the industry, and they're there to protect consumers. And so if you have any questions about Leads Council, please head over to leadscouncil.org. Hit me up. It's rob@leadscouncil.org, and I will try to answer your questions. I want to get into the actual meat of this presentation today, and we're going to talk about 3 efficiencies that run today's next-gen lead center or call center. We're talking about lead efficiency, agent efficiency, and manager efficiency. That's all we're going to do on the slides today. We're going to turn this back over so that we can have a natural conversation, look at you and you can look at us. And really quickly, I'm going to stop the share. We've got everybody up there. Heather, this year has been a crazy year. I don't think that anybody could deny that. COVID and all of the related things, election, has really impacted us. I know that we talked earlier, and you talked about having remote call centers, and you talked about also having in-house call centers as far as it relates to agents. With this year being so crazy, I'd like to kick it off with you and help me understand, especially as we're starting this off with the the lead efficiency. How did that actually impact the leads that you were buying and the things that are impacting your call center today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been in the call center industry 21 years. I've had remote agents for 7 years. So my agent's working from home, so I'm being very comfortable with. But COVID actually took my in-house center and put them at home too. So I had approximately 100, 200 people working from home. Then we had another 200 in the office that we had to move remotely overnight. So what I've always known, and this is kind of a taboo, is that it's so much easier to manage people from home. You don't deal with so-and-so smoking in the parking lot and they're in a fight over here and there's problems like that. And when that noise shuts down, you really can start managing by the numbers. So if you have an efficient software, you have a great telephony system that gives you real-time reporting that's presenting information to our leadership team at all times. You're not dealing with as much of the agent headache, like are they in dress code, that kind of stuff. We really found ourselves to be more efficient. And though the transition was really hard, switching them from overnight to the next day, we actually produced more and were more successful when we moved everyone from home. And that being said, much like a lot of the country, we're not bringing them back in the office ever. We actually ended up more effective, more efficient. better retention, people sticking it out longer, and happier employees. So it actually maybe is a silver lining in this whole mess of 2020.
I agree with you. And I've talked to several of our members who run and operate call centers. And I think back in March when we had an initial webinar with like, what are we doing today? Trying to just update people. What we heard was, I can't wait to get back into the in-house environment because we're missing this synergy. We're missing, the camaraderie, and we're missing, that gamification of trying to get people to outdo the other person. But I will say that we're hearing the same thing now after 7-8 months. People have settled in and they're actually finding that, post-COVID actually is working for them as a remote operation. We're going to get back into that a little bit more as we talk a little bit more about the agent efficiency. But I want you to set the stage for me. As a lead efficiency side of things, I have talked to Nima many times as a board member on the council about how is the call center, like the history of call center operated. What is it like? And one of the things he told me was that the game of quantity versus quality was always top of mind. And help me understand, when we're talking about next gen call center, specifically as we're talking about the leads, help me understand, how has that changed and how has it impacted you on the lead side?
Yeah. Such a great question. Like I said, 21 years ago, I started in call centers, and long gone are the days of buying the phone book and putting in a dialer, press 1, and dialing 10 billion records a day. And really what's come down to is micro efficiencies. It's such a smart thought, but it took us years to get there. So what I can tell you is that I went from, say, back 20 years ago, having one dialer person who would load these massive lists, we'd blast things out, etc. And now our analytics and data team is probably the most powerful team in boosting efficiencies and getting us more sales. It used to be, we're having a slow sales day, put a spiff out on the floor or walk the floors. And now we're having a slow day. Let's look at our micro efficiencies within data and what we're accepting and not accepting. So I can tell you it's gotten incredibly granular. And there are just some great best practices that drastically have increased performance. So if I'm talking in terms of lead efficiency, I now know a lot of questions to ask. For example, where am I getting my data? Is it a shared lead or is it exclusive? And that makes a difference, right? So if I'm getting a shared lead, I'm going to call that 15 times, not 15, we'll say three times right in a row, right? But if it's an exclusive lead, I might slow down and work an omni-channel approach. I might say, you know what, I'm going to call them, then text them, maybe tomorrow I'll email them. And so now that we know the consumer behavior, we can make a decision based on the lead type. I might also look at things like, is it high intent or low intent? Is this a co-reg feed where someone's trying to win a gift card? Or did someone see a solar panel and fill out a full form? That might change the level in which I put it into a hopper to dial first, right? Obviously, my high intent leads I want to call first. So I'm looking at sources and I'm looking at how the data behaves. I'm also looking granular as to what zip codes have the highest contact rate. In solar specifically, Californians beat up. We've been called, I live in California, for solar a gazillion times. But if you call Louisiana, they pick up their phones, right? So we're looking at geography, we're looking at the lead type, the lead source, we're looking at the CPA. And this is something like our cost per acquisition by source, with all that granularity. And with a great telephony system or a great CRM, I'm able to see that in real time. And sometimes my technology alerts me that something's gone awry on that lead efficiency. So obviously there's other things I look at when I'm looking at lead efficiency. For example, I might look at risk mitigation, right? There's some data that I can call a lot because the person had really high intent. And there's some data where they try to win a gift card and 32 other verticals are calling at them. So you really can get granular when you're looking at it. I also, there's so much software out there now that lets me decide if they even want to accept the lead. So remember how I used to call the phone book? Now I can be like, you know what, are you in the right zip code? Do you have income? Are you on a litigator list? Do I already own the record? And before I even pay for that lead, I can accept or reject the lead. So how you get your lead has changed so drastically in the last couple of years. And then it follows next. Once you get that lead, how are you going to call the lead? Like, what's your process for calling the lead? And that too is no longer a massive phone list that you just dial through and hope you get something. Now I'm looking at things like, first, is my call connecting? And I'm sure we'll talk about store shaking, or you guys have heard all about it. But first question is my call connecting? Is my call ringing spam likely? Have I registered my phone numbers? There's some great companies out there now that are helping protect you guys by registering the phone numbers with carriers. And then I've even seen some really cool futuristic things where on the caller ID, you can put your picture and your logo. Companies like Newstar are doing that. So it's, how I buy my lead, how I choose to call my lead. And then also list management. This is a huge thing. And this is one of the things that my telephony system is fantastic with. I can now look in real time and say, hey, this lead has made me $700 in 20 minutes, but this list has made me $0 in 1 hour. And I can shut off the bad data and reset the good data. So that kind of micro efficiency, again, in a great phone system, has allowed me to be so much more powerful with a fraction of the amount of data. It's always that opportunity cost. The time you're spent talking to leads that don't result in sales is your biggest cost, because you're paying payroll, right? And you're paying minute costs, right? So my two biggest costs as an owner or as a call center person is always payroll. It's minutes, it's telephony, and it's data. So spending time on inefficient leads is incredibly costly. And then the third thing I'd say, just to wrap that up, it's how I get my leads, how I call my leads, and then what do I do after I call my leads? And dispositioning is so important. So a lot of people, when I consult, are always surprised for me to hear me say, my highest converting list is my not interested. If I take all of my data and take all of my not interested dispositions and I load them as a list, it's better than web data, because it's a homeowner who's qualified, who picked up, who said no thanks, and you get a new salesperson on, and it says, and they close. Additionally, there's talk time files. I can take my data, export it with a great telephony system, and say this person talked to people for 2 minutes, and then reset that list, and it has a great conversion. And the last thing I just want to add to that is understanding, again, in a granular way, how to reset a list and how to route data. So there's so many different ways, and I have an amazing telephony system that allows me to choose. I can reset a list based on time. I can reset a list based on a disposition, or I can just reset the list because I think it's a good list. So that granularity, again, on all of these leads has changed the world of marketing so drastically since I've been here. And what else is fantastic? It's the right thing to do by people. It's the right thing to do with the new regulations. And it's so much more cost profitable. So why not? So I've seen a lot of change, and I can go on forever about this. But I want to say one more thing about lead efficiency is that lead efficiency 2.0, the future of where we're going with this is unbelievable. I've done a number of different demos about artificial intelligence and how it's going to do things like that list I told you guys about. My telephony company, or a company like Convoso, is soon going to be able to do amazing AI where instead of me seeing that list is not making me money, they'll see the list is not making money and they'll turn it off for me. The world is changing, and it's going to be fantastic. And I'm super excited for those things. I also want to say that there's things like phone behavior intelligence, and that kind of thing will tell you what date and time is the best time to call someone. So super excited about the future, and that's my thoughts on efficiencies.
You obviously dive deep into the metrics, and you learn from it, and you react and you adapt to it. So that's obvious with what you say. Mike, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you. Thank you, first of all, for coming into your office on a COVID day. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, or your call center, whatever that is. But Mike, on the yin and yang here, we have Heather, who dives deep into this, measures every piece of analytic. Where is the overlap for you? I know that, I've talked to you many times, and you tend to shoot from the hip a lot, but you're successful at what you're looking for. Help me understand, from a lead efficiency, where the overlap from what Heather said and where you see it is. Help the audience understand that.
She had such a great depth of understanding about a dialer. It's a pleasure to hear her talk. It's like hearing an engineer speak to a design and something they built, because it is an amazing amount of cohesive systems that are working together at one, and it really is that person who understands how to utilize those systems. So the in-depth analytics she gave, I can tell you the things that I took away is that, the things that I look at would be like workflow automation. So, all of these things are like attributing factors to what she does. Workflow automation would allow me to prepare my data per day. So in the past, I would have to go find my data, pull reports, looking at call counts, looking at like what she said, like you call the right data at the right time, put them on the right phone with the candidate. Well, to dumb that down a little, what I would do in the past is I would pull reports, I'd look at my call counts, I'd watch where they were scaling by zip codes and regions, and I'd have to kind of create an articulation of how that data was going to move around for the day. What was I going to do to prepare my day? Like Heather would agree, you can't just load the data and hope that, for the best, 10,000 leads and 9,992 was the productive lead. If you just threw them in there, it has to go all the way through 1 to 9,902. So workflow automation allows us to go in every night and run a workflow that looks at where's your call count, what was your highest producing list, lowest producing list, and create a workflow that moves the data around to new lists such as no interest customers and higher contact, higher value leads that normally you would look at a day-to-day operation and go, God, this hour feels off, right? And you have analytics, but you're in a field section as well, feels off, and you would go and try to look through like some penetration reports. What list is hurting me? Quickly, I know it's always attributed to leads, but I'm readily looking for what is hurting me now. And as easy as saying at any moment, it's the leads, I have to make a quick determination that how many people are on, how many hours do I have today? In the last hour, how many productive agents, how many non-productive? Did we have an impromptu meeting? So those things do affect lead performance when taken out of context in a short period of time. So, and a lot of the things like profitability reporting and DID scoring, those all go into being able to manage your day, because if the day's off, I do go look at my DID scoring to make sure that if everything's operational, the best thing that I look at is how am I going to bring us back into orbit, right? Something's now obviously off, but we're still in orbit, but we're not in the right trajectory. Something's up, and my job is just to fix that. And the other thing that, she touched on artificial intelligence, the excitement for me has been, I've always been kind of tied to the panel, right? In the old days, if you want to when you're mixing records, you have this big kind of switch, right? Or the big old power switch. Well, the dialers of the old were kind of turn them up, turn it down. Oh, whoa, hold too slow, up too fast. And you never really, that was your talent. It was like airline pilot, airline control. Old airline control was like little magnets and airplanes, right? And it was like, you're just moving them around. And it was like, oh my God, the guy's panicked. Is that plane going to crash? I better do everything right, right? Computers improve, and then it's showing the trajectory of the plane, the angle of ascent, the amount of feet that it's losing per distance. And you're like, oh, you have trust. And that trust, to me, is something that everything she mentioned creates a trust that I'm able to now go and look at, which I call shady corners, something that might have been missed because in the past I had little magnetic airplanes and I had to move them everywhere. And God forbid I made a mistake and I would cost my company thousands of dollars if I didn't move the airplane away. And you could attribute, God, I walk away to the bathroom, or someone pulls me in a meeting. And it's fun to be social and when you're doing something in the office. 15 minutes for us might cost our company $5,000, literally, and it might make the company $5,000. So that's the excitement of what we do. But like those little things where the planes became automated and it was a screen of planes coming in, that person could now take all that energy, which was based on stress, anxiety, and kind of management of functional things that were mechanical. When they've become automated, the life of us as an admin for leads, efficiency agent, and admin has changed measurably, where our time is now being spent in other areas of improvement that previously we were probably just kind of forced to go with what was done, right? We could raise our hand and say, I don't like this, but there weren't forward thinking about, good God, turn off my list if it's not performing today because my profitability. Apologize about that. That is something amazing on all levels, like save the bleeding. And that's just a term, but it could be within that hour. I could be losing some profit. And for someone to have my back in a shady corner I can't see and say, hey, I saved you, I turned that list off. Oh God, 5,000 dials. you could have had 14 more sales if you dialed this list. So technically that's opportunity lost. That's an opportunity cost.
Mike, I can't thank you enough for using the air traffic control analogy. You probably don't know that I was an air traffic controller in the Navy,
really?
so I was just all about your storytelling. And when you said orbit, I wish you would have left the virtual background of outer space. So you missed an opportunity there, buddy. Now I'm going to move this over. Nima, look, you were the person who talked to me early on about like how it has been. Smile and Dow. Buy as many as you can, quantity over quality, platforms don't matter. Heather mentioned something about omni-channel, which I really want to see you drop a little bit of info on that. So help me understand, tie up what we just heard from Heather and Mike and help us understand from a platform perspective, how has lead efficiency changed?
Yeah, no, great question. So, ultimately, the biggest thing we always say is you need to stop buying or generating as many leads as you do. And if you tell a sales or marketing leader that, they'll tell you you're crazy, right? No salesperson ever said, give me less leads. Nobody in marketing ever said, let's drive less leads. And I'm not saying completely stop, but you need to really look at the right things. You need to look at improving your contact rate. You have no choice because of how things have happened and consumers being so annoyed with the amount of calls that they get. So to me, there's two things you really got to look at when it comes to your reporting, looking at the CPA, your cost per acquisition. You got to look at it at a list or list vendor level. And it came about because when we ask people, how do you measure success? Everybody always says, we just care about getting 100 sales a day. That's it. That's all we look at. And how we get there, we just dial and smile. And it doesn't work anymore. You need to take an approach of understanding how much did it cost to buy those leads or generate them, right? How much did it take for the agent's time to try to convert those leads? Like Heather says, if you're spending more time trying to convert leads, you're just wasting your time on leads that may not be as interested, but you're paying a lot of money indirectly for that. And then thirdly, your dialer cost, because it is minutes and whatever else you're paying. So tying that up together to understand in real time what that CPA is on a list vendor level will help you know which ones you should focus on and to stop buying them on other sources that are not converting. And then the other part of it is when it comes to omni-channel, because of call blocking, call labeling, right, scam likely, especially stir shaking, which will certainly affect lead efficiency, you need to look at a multifaceted approach to how you reach out to your customers. And when we say omni-channel, it has to have the ability to reach out to the same person using multiple channels, but have the ability to stop when there's either success or a do not call, whatever it might be, so that you don't keep going and harassing the consumer. But having the ability to do that in an automated manner is the most important way to ensure that you can convert your leads and not get your calls blocked. So using a text message and email in combination with calls will really help you, work it smarter rather than harder. I will say with stir shaken, which if you guys, for those that are not familiar, essentially it's technology that has to be implemented to prevent caller IDs from being spoofed. You should really ask your dial provider these key questions. What are they doing to prepare for it? Because come July of next year, you have to have this in place, which means you have to have a certain level of what they call attestation that the provider has to provide, a certain level of the call being rated. And if they say that the highest level they can sign is a B, that's an issue. You really need to understand what they're doing about it, right? So especially for open source solutions like Vici-Dial, which many call centers use, it will become an issue because they're not, they're using a voice over IP provider that they don't know their customers, so they would have to take the responsibility for those calls. So ultimately just ask your technology provider what they're doing and make sure that they're signing or they're going to sign 100% of our calls. That's what we're looking to do ultimately to be ready for that.
I think that was super important. And I remember when I was at a PACE conference a couple of years ago, I think it was in San Antonio, I sat in on a omni-channel session. And it was important to make the distinction of not just having channels, but having channels that interact with other channels so that you learn from your email initiatives versus your text messaging initiatives and actually react to those instead of just saying, well, we sent a text or we sent an email. I don't know where that all landed. Heather, I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to flip it up a little bit. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, you've worked with remote agents for a while now. And obviously we hit on the COVID thing, but I can't think of anything more impacted and more important in today's world than that agent. And so help me understand, when we're talking about the new call center, the 2.0 call center, the next gen call center, how does agent efficiency actually play a role? And I want to also tag you from something that we kind of overlooked or just kind of skimmed over earlier, compliance, and knowing that that agent is calling somebody who wanted to be called. You know, I think that's important, and we miss that sometimes. So help me understand, what are you guys doing as it relates to agent efficiency?
So to start off, you know, the things that I'm looking at for agent efficiency changed when we went from a typical call center where the agents were behind me in their desk to where the agents went remote. In the, I'll call it old versus new, or 1.0 versus 2.0, just to give us a reflection point. We would walk the aisles, right? If you felt an hour was unproductive and you heard chatter, right? You could look and see like waves of people moving, or you could hear specific aisles or pockets of louder conversation than others. So you could go and address what you thought was agent productive, right? And that was, you had multiple managers, team leaders, then agents, right? And you had all this structure of how the agents were kind of kept in line, but not through regimental process, right? Through encouragement of having a leader right next to them. And then the leader as a team leader right near them, so that in a call center, the number one deficit would be lack of being in the seat, right? Oh, I have a question, and they're out of their seat. So there's my immediate old school way of how did I keep them productive? My old way was just keep them in their seat, right? That's such an old way of thinking when you go to 2.0, because they're all at home. So they're in their seat in the kitchen, the kids are cooking, making cereal, and now it's more keeping them engaged than just regimentally being like, well, are you on the phone? Make dials, right? That was the old way. You really kind of did not improperly interject, but you did have to keep it. And now through remote, the agent learning is different. You know, some of the most awesome things that have come to play, like dynamic scripting, right? So like this is something like we're agent efficiency, and how do you blend dynamic scripting with agent efficiency? And it's like, well, I'm in 6 different states. That's 6 different compliance issues. You must say it at this time, this state. You must acknowledge it this way. You must on the recorded line, right? Or you must say recorded line within this amount of time. And one agent, we don't have like Facebook or YouTube where they check every call all day because we're listening to the high value calls per se. So the system with dynamic scripting or something that can guide the agent, hey, you're in, let's just use a hypothetical state of Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, make sure you say recorded line by this time. You should have said it by this. You should have said compliance quote here, and then you're free to follow the standardized sales script, right? So that our company bought a compliant lead. But in our handling of that lead and the contact of that customer, we did it in a compliant order. So it's not just as a call center that, hey, I bought a compliant lead. We're all set over here. It's like, no, how did you handle that lead? How was that lead handled? And then, you know, kind of going into agent efficiency, I use some recollection of workflow automation, right? And the reason I say that is because Heather brought this up in the past, but let's say I just allow a lead to maintain its location up to a 40 call count. Well, that's not being productivity. It's probably exasperating an agent. It's probably making that customer upset. They're in the same campaign. I could have simply performed a function that said at a certain time, at a certain juncture, at a certain measure, please move that lead out of the mainstream, do some omni-channel marketing, such as send it a automatic voicemail or automatic intelligent voicemail now, which replaced ringless voicemail, right? So now at a certain call count or a certain measure of a region, I can now leave a selective message and then an additional message that is different so that it is a scaling attempt rather than just a multiplicitable attack of the same exact approach to that. So the things that I've seen with my agents, that all roundabout that I just summed up comes from actionable data, right? Without actionable data, we used to have our data team download 4 spreadsheets, and then they would do VLOOKUPs and bounce offs charts and all these things, because I would love it. I would just geek out over that stuff and give me all these bounce charts that no one in the company could do but one guy. But then he's backloaded an hour, and you say, I need my report in 10 minutes. I have a performance issue. I need that report. And he's like, I can't. System locked up. I can't get my data. And it's actionable reports have changed everything. We have our data points so readily available that effective management, admin management of the dialer is done through the access of data. I think if you dumb most of the stuff and the awesomeness, it's really the data wasn't available before, and the data is now available now at a hyper, I think she used a term where you were, the measure of time, it was a micro efficiency. It's so available at a microcosm of a time frame, we're able to really improve our efficiency.
Mike, I love what you're doing here, because I think it leads perfectly over to Heather, who is all about the data. One of the things I can say, Heather, is that, I want to go back to COVID, because I think COVID is important here. Not only talking about how the platform factors into it, but the agent has been hit with a lot of things that even if you had a remote call center and had these agents working on all cylinders prior to COVID, kids are home, they're playing video games, the internet is consumed. And, how does that balance, especially if a platform, is trying to keep up also on the other side from a resource standpoint? Help me understand a little bit.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say, it's a little Orwellian or Big Brother, but having the data and technology there to support a mass volume that micro-efficiency Mike was just talking about has given us so much information so quickly that we can make decisions. And what gets lost a lot of times is the feelings portion, what you're talking about. Those fists on the floor, the walking the floor, the high-fiving, that stuff, you lose some of that when you move to simply robotic. So I think there's a lot of, I think COVID, in addition to kind of what I was already doing offline, brought in, because of morale. I mean, we also were in a global pandemic, right? So there are ways to offset that. So yes, agent efficiency, at the end of the day, we're in business to make money, right? So efficiency is going to matter, and we want to have those micro efficiencies. But there are a lot of things to do and that we've done to kind of tie in the two things, heart and technology, right? So for example, I would say one of the things with agent efficiency is that you need to write a comp plan that ties in your KPIs. This is one of the most commonly missed things I see when I walk into consult. I've consulted for 100 plus call centers, and I walk in and their pause time's out of control. What happens if their pause time out of control? Does it make any difference to them? So I would say, in this COVID world, the people who were already at home, nothing changed, right? They were performing. But why did those people in the office suddenly go from people in the office to almost a 50% increase in production when they went home? And the truth is, we could see what they're doing at all times, and there wasn't the rah-rah rallies, and there wasn't the 72 bathroom breaks, and there wasn't the smoke breaks and the this and that. So the efficiency part came in. So how do you keep the hard part? Well, the first thing is you have to have great, and I know we'll go into this next, management efficiency. You need these one-on-ones. You need daily check-ins. You need a morning meeting. You need a Friday rally. So you get those things in there. But what are you rallying? You're rallying the efficiencies of what they're doing. So I would say some of the great things about becoming more just data analytical and less people management, I have to tell you, in the 21 years doing this, not having people in the office is the best thing that ever happened to us. And I love people. I'm a people person, but it was so much distraction. So-and-so's fighting over here. So-and-so's up from the bathroom again. So-and-so's dress is inappropriate at work. Just so many call center problems that we really, with them at home, can focus on the data and focus on developing people. So I would say my biggest kind of new find recently is working with Convoso on skills-based routing. I told you in the beginning about lead efficiency. So if I have a high intent lead where someone went and Googled solar and they filled out a form, I want to give that to my best rep. I want to give that to my best rep who's the best chance of closing it. If I have someone who wanted to win a $500 Walmart card, so they opted in online, I want to give that to my new reps maybe who aren't as sophisticated. So putting the right leads in front of the right people at the right time is really important. And that's a agency efficiency. And then how you deal with the heart of that. There's a lot of complexity because some companies tell the reps they're in the hierarchy, some companies don't tell the reps they're in the hierarchy. And that's complex on its own. The next thing I would say is, what are your KPIs and are you using some variation of the agent performance report? If you're not looking at this word utilization in a call center, you're in trouble, right? And that is the amount of time that they are on a workable status. So if you think about that, they're either talking on a call or waiting for another call. Those are workable statuses. The rest of the time, they're not being effective. The last thing I would say is schedule adherence. Make sure that they're on track with their schedule. A dialer doesn't run efficiently with only 5 people on it. So you have to schedule breaks and lunches and make sure they're on time. And lastly, just in our 2.0 world, when it comes to agent efficiency, there are amazing quality assurance companies out there that can do record all of your calls, score them for you, and send you information. Meaning 100% of calls can be scored on a quality assurance basis. They can also alert you if someone's cussing or taking a loud voice or says the word free, and they'll pop that recording into you. Companies like Callminer or Balto. So if you're not using one of those, look into it. It's one of the best ways to stay efficient.
Well, thank you. And I know that you rushed through that. In fact, Nima, we need to probably do a webinar on one after another so that we can give the breadth that we need. So I'm going to turn it over to you for the next 4 minutes before we move over to management. Nima, you've heard these two people who operate very, very different and very similar situations and what they're experiencing from a platform perspective and on the agency efficiency side. How are you reacting and what are you seeing?
Yeah, so look, the best way in my mind to improve the agent morale is to give them better or good data or leads. It isn't obvious, but a lot of people go cheap and want to buy the cheapest lead or pay the least amount. And that's the one thing that's been true since I began in the call center industry about 14 years ago. But as a platform, there's a big problem with voicemail detection, right? The number of false positives that actually leak through, we call it leaked voicemails that come through to the agent. If you don't have good data, that you're either beating up too much. Eventually those calls go unanswered because either your caller ID is being flagged. So you need to have good caller ID reputation management in place that allows you to make sure you're not making too many calls so that they get blocked, because once they get blocked, they go unanswered, which means it goes to answering machine, which means that your system is also not well tuned to detect the difference between an answering machine or a voicemail or a live answer. That agent now gets a lot of voicemails through, and that immediately kills their momentum because they're used to going from one call to the next. And once you break that momentum, their performance immediately gets impacted. So I would say as a platform, you need to pay attention to how often you're calling the lead, right? Don't beat it to death. Use different channels like we already talked about, but then make sure that the voicemail detection is also doing a good job. Whereas we analyze millions of calls and fine-tune the parameters over time to reduce that leakage, because you can't have a perfect system that does not leak through any voicemails. But our job really is to minimize that number, because that's one of the biggest frustrations that call center agents have, is getting those voicemails that leak through.
I think it's super important that we all remember that. And, if you haven't heard the theme here, you have to have a platform that supports these new types of ways of thinking about how to operate your call center. And so we're going to beat that over and over again. And I'm going to move over to Heather, because I think this is your section. I mean, if there were ever a section that we created for someone, this one is you. When it comes down to management and KPIs and reporting, like, you have to have a plan. You have to know what you're doing. And if we're talking about a conversion of quantity versus quality, we really are going to be doing more with less. And I think this section becomes more important than any of the others as it relates to that. Help us understand what's it like for you, and then what does the next gen lead center call center look like as it relates to management?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I think back to Mike's point and our original point, in the old days, it was about rallying your floor. The personality type of call center supervisor was really kind of a hype person, like they were just trying to get people excited. And as we've changed, as we continue to grow with this micro data, micro efficiencies, and the tip of information just at your fingertips all the time, we've really moved more into an analytical approach. So I can tell you, these are KPIs you should be looking at. These are things I train my management team to look at. And we also have a resource management team that really digs into the analytics. So the good news is, as Mike had mentioned, there's a lot of software coming out in 2.0, which I'll speak about, that's going to kind of revolutionize this even more. But in the meantime, I would say, and I said this on the last one, the best way to effectively have management manage employees is to incentivize everyone based on actual KPIs. I know that the more people I speak to and the more appointments I set, the more sales I get. I know that as a fact. I know that if I make sure they don't burn through my data, my calls to appointment have a set rate. So I would start off on just a bigger scale. The first thing I would say, manage your queues. And what I mean by that and the higher level thing is, what's your abandonment rate? There's legal thresholds on this that you have to stay within safe harbor goals. I believe it's under 3%. But watch your abandonment rate, watch your answering machine percentage. A great system like Convoso has a really great detection program. What is your contact rate per list? You have to get that granular. What dispositions are you using? And I do all this disposition reporting. If one rep is dispositioning everything not interested, that's a coaching issue. But if all of a sudden all of our dispositions are Spanish, that's a data issue. So look at your dispositions on a queue side. What's your wait time? This is a really, really good question. Your dialer settings aren't effective if your people are waiting more than 10 seconds. So in between calls, either your data is not effective, but I would still challenge you because people are, it's the data. I don't think so. You're not predictive dialing properly. And then what's the agent's available time? So those are things I would say at the queue level. Now when it gets down to managing my team, say I'm a supervisor, I should be looking at things like schedule adherence. You're scheduled to be at this time and take your breaks and lunch this time. Are you doing it? So schedule adherence is something I'd look at. I would look at utilization. What am I paying you for? Almost 100% of the companies I've walked in to consult for have had a 50% or less utilization. That means more than half the day their employee is on a non-workable status that can't generate any money. So utilization is a workable status, and you have to calculate it usually. So I would watch that number, and what's happening is the other 50% of the time they're on pause for some reason or the other. Then I would also just say, look at their cost per acquisition per agent, their average talk time, calls over 30 seconds. And the reason you want to look at calls over 30 seconds versus 60 seconds is if calls over 30 seconds means they can't even get into the pitch. Calls over 60 seconds meant they got in the pitch and didn't overcome an objection. I'd look at dead calls, answer machines, and then obviously quality assurance. The more you can monitor and listen to your employees and provide feedback, the better.
Heather, in 30 seconds, somebody asked in the audience, what are some of the less obvious KPIs you might be looking for?
So I would say that first one I just said now, calls over X amount of seconds. People don't usually understand why we're looking at that number, and it's to see where the agent's going wrong. Either they're not getting their pitch out, or someone saying, I'm not interested in their hanging up. Dispositions are kind of a little bit less obvious. If you pull disposition, also answering machine disposition. You know how many people that like 80% of their calls, they mark answer machines? It's not humanly possible. So I would look at dispositioning. I would look at their talk time. I also look at calls to appointments or calls to sales, because that will tell you if they're burning data. And then I would say utilization and schedule adherence. And people always are dumbfounded why I want them to adhere to their schedule. And the answer is, if you don't have enough people on a dialer, sub 20, it doesn't dial effectively. So what you see is, if I have 15 people in and I'm dialing, my wait times get higher, and there's a cyclical effect. I'm not dialing fast enough, my wait times get higher, I abandon more, and then I slow down too much, and then I abandon too much. So schedule adherence is probably one of the ones that people typically don't put enough emphasis on.
Heather gets faster as we
cram
her time over there.
I should have been an auctioneer.
Mike, look, it sounds like all this boils down that we need to operate smarter. And I can imagine you're like I am. We need all the help we can. Help me understand from your perspective, how does the management side of this, how do we have to operate smarter, and what does that look like?
Did we lose Mike?
Did we lose Mike? That's that's incredible. I didn't even notice.
We lost him a little while
He
ago.
is going to be so bummed that he didn't get to answer that because he's like, I'm not the smart one on this one. Hey, look, Heather, maybe we'll get Mike back. Maybe we won't. There was an earlier question, and I quite honestly, I don't know the answer to this, so I won't try. But what about how agents are spending more time getting stuck on voicemails? Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, okay, so there are ways to detect that. So you can, one, in a real-time screen, say in Convoso, you can see someone sitting on a dead call, or you can see someone sitting on a log call. There's also ways to export. So for example, I might export my call detail records. I put a filter on it that showed voicemail, and then I sort by time. This is how I catch my reps. So export all the data, sort by voicemail as a disposition, and then sort by time. So if you're on a 23-minute voicemail, there's a problem, right? And then obviously I'll do a count if by agent, and then I'll say, okay, well, these top 10 agents spent an average of 7 minutes on voicemails, right? So that's how you catch the behavior. But the question is, like always, I know we're talking very technical, but they're people, right? So a lot of times when I catch it, I just talk to them once. I explain to them the reasoning, and you know what they're saying? They're telling me, I want my utilization to be high, so I want to be on a workable status. And it's a coaching opportunity.
Well, I've been given the 5 minutes left, so I'm going to leave this up to one of my favorite buds, kind of wrap this up. When it talks about management, you've heard it from Heather. We did not hear it from Mike, although he had a lot of good things to say. Help me understand, Nima, like how does a platform help somebody like Heather in her management role operate and transition from how it was to how it needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about automation these days, right? How do you do things more efficiently? I mean, everything we're talking about is about efficiency. And so finding ways to automate routine tasks is where you need to look at, whether it comes from, how the dial is dialing on a predictive mode, right? A lot of systems, you need to manually decide to increase or decrease the number of calls being placed, so you can kind of manage that balance between drop rating and not too long of a wait time. So you want to make sure the system can scale the calls up and down automatically while managing the drop rating. Then there's your list management. At the end of the day, the ability for certain leads to be called or moved around from one list to another based on any criteria, whether it is the zip code, call count, status, whatever it might be, you need to have the ability to automate as much of that process as possible, because in an environment like a call center, you have to make decisions quickly. If you don't, like Mike had mentioned, any minutes or seconds can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. So you want to have the ability to make those quick decisions, and you can't do that if you can't automate things. And so lastly, I would also urge to, just in general, to utilize an outside resource to just improve everything you're doing as a manager, right? That would be a counterpart at a different call center, an outside consultant, or your dialer provider. They typically have a customer success manager who knows the system inside and out to help you get the most out of the system as a manager and set you up for success.
Look, I've been blown away, and Nima, we've done this 4 or 5 times, and every time it gets just better and better and better. And Heather, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Mike, thank you when you watch this back and see that you dropped off early on. that background wasn't the biggest problem. We'll see that later on. I really appreciate Pace for allowing us to have this session. On your screen, there should be the contact information for all of our panelists. And Heather and Nima, thank you again. This is so informative, and I think so important for people out there operating call centers. I hope that they reach out and ask you for more. Right now, I think that's the end, and we'll see you later. Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.